Our featured program for today, Susan Brower became the Minnesota State Demographer in February 2012, and she directs the Minnesota State Demographic Center. In this capacity, she travels throughout, talking to Minnesotans about the new social and economic realities that are brought about by recent demographic shifts. Susan's work applies an understanding of demographic trends to changes in the range of areas, including the state's economy and workforce, education, health, immigration, and even rural population changes. Susan joined the State Demographic Center after working as a researcher in the Minnesota Compass Project at Wilder Research in St. Paul. Prior to that, she worked at the Population Study Center at the University of Michigan. Please put your hands together for our feature program, Susan Brower.
Hi, everyone. How are you? When I'm not being a demographer, I'm being a mom of a 12-year-old and 16-year-old who neither of them are yet driving. So that means that my other part-time job is driving all around the Twin Cities. So if you see a silver minivan zoom by, that may or may not be me. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to share with you the biggest demographic trends that I think will impact your businesses today, particularly in the area of the availability of workers, because there's some big changes that are already happening. We're already starting to see some of those changes, and we're likely to see them into the future. So I'm going to explain those to you today, and then if you have questions for me, I'd love to talk to you. But first off, I want to tell you where I work. Did you all see the NPR raccoon a while back? Yeah, okay. So I work right in this building here. It's called Centennial Office Building, just south of the Capitol, and I was so pleased that they had this picture because now I have a way to tell people exactly where I work. The change, I want to start out just by telling you some of the changes that are happening generally with respect to population around the state. Minnesota does pretty well in terms of population growth. We grow well for a Midwestern state, just not anywhere near as fast as some of the southern states or southwestern states. So we have grown about 5% in the first 7 years of this decade. That's about the US average. And the growth has been concentrated right in the middle of the Twin Cities metropolitan area. What had happened in past decades is growth was spreading outward from the center, but what we've seen in just the last 7 years is that growth has really concentrated, particularly right in the center of Minneapolis and St. Paul in the center cities. You can see Bloomington makes the list too in terms of the 15 fastest growing cities, but what we've seen in terms of Minneapolis and St. Paul's growth in the last 7 years has been really a big change for our metro and really pretty tremendous. So just to give you a sense of what this growth has looked like in the past, Minneapolis worked really hard on its last census, the 2010 census. It got all kinds of folks involved and ready for it. And in fact, it won an award for participation in the census for a big city. And when they got their envelope back, I don't know, they got their number back in the mail. I think it was a download, but let's just say they got it in the mail. They ripped open their envelope. They looked at their letter. They had lost 40 people over the course of the decade. So they'd done a great job counting, still lost 40 people. Same with St. Paul, lost people in between 2000 and 2010. Now what we have in the first 7 years is an additional more than 60,000 just in 7 years in those two cities alone. So it just gives you a sense of how much of a difference we've experienced in this decade. Many metros around the US have experienced this type of growth, and what has happened elsewhere is that the growth has begun to dissipate out into the first-string suburbs, like Richfield, like Bloomington, as the young generation who have moved in are mostly renting in Minneapolis and St. Paul are looking to own homes. They start moving out to the suburbs. So that's what's happening other places. We haven't seen it here yet, but we may begin to see it. We expect to see that will likely, we'll see that pick up a little bit. for the suburbs. So if you're a demographer, you have to talk about population aging. And I'm sharing this with you because it's the basis for the changes in the workforce that I want you to understand that are happening. So the last 6 decades of aging in Minnesota have looked like this. This graph is telling you that each decade we added anywhere between about 47,000 and 91,000 additional older adults to the state. People age 65 and above. That group was growing because our state was growing. And what do you think it's going to look like this decade? Don't guess lower. That's a bad guess. No, I heard higher. I heard higher. Yeah. So we're already almost through this first bar, the 2010s, right? Somehow we blinked and we're in 2019. We've already added almost 300,000 additional older adults to the state. There'll be 335,000 on top of that. This is something that's really easy to predict. This is not super complicated modeling, folks. This is, we know how many people live here now. We know how old they are. My predecessor, who was in this job for 30 years, would say, we think people age on average 1 year every 12 months. That's what they taught us in demography school, people. So these are the people that are already living here. They're aging into that 65-year-old age group. And just to give you a sense of that inevitability and that change, we have all these baby boomers who are moving up over the 65-year-old age mark and moving into retirement. And it's really happening. Lots of times I'll talk to folks and they'll say, I'm going to work until I'm 80-something. You're never going to get me to stop working. And that's true, there are people like that. But when you look at kind of all of us in the state, people really start retiring quickly after about the age of 65, and we see those numbers drop off very, very quickly. So we look at the number of people we have available to work in the state, and we look at what the likelihood is that each person will work at a certain age, and we roll that together, and we get a projection for how quickly we think our workforce will grow going forward. How many workers will we have in the future compared to how many workers we have now? And what we have is a picture of very little growth in the number of workers available to fill our jobs going forward. In the 1990s, we were adding about 55,000 additional workers to the state every year. We added about 550,000 over the course of that whole decade. Now we're adding just about 6,000 to 7,000 each year. So the number of people we have in the state who are available to work, likely to work and available to work, is very close to the people that we'll have in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. There's just not a lot of growth there. This is because so many baby boomers, again, are moving into retirement. We've got a big millennial generation coming in too, but just not quite enough to both replace the baby boomers and keep up that level of growth that we've had in the past. We've looked at kind of recent immigration patterns, and based on how much growth we get from immigration and how many people we lose to other states from immigration, these are the numbers that we come up with. So these numbers could change if we see a big increase in immigration, either from other states, from other countries. But that's kind of not the narrative that we hear right now, right? We're not hearing, we need people, how do we get more people here and fast? So these numbers very well could go negative. We could very well see a decline in the number of workers that we have in the state very soon, depending on what happens with immigration. So I've been talking about the number of people. That's kind of my thing that I project, the number of people we're going to have. If we line it up kind of with the number of jobs we're likely to have, it gets pretty tricky because the number of jobs are related to the number of people. But I can give you a snapshot of where we are now with respect to people and jobs. And this is from a survey that the state does that asks employers about the number of job openings that they have and compares it to the number of people who are actively looking for work. The red line is showing you the number of jobs that are open in Minnesota right now. It's about 140,000 job openings. There's about 80,000 people looking for those 140,000 job openings right now. So that doesn't say anything about, are the people located in the right spot for where the jobs are? It doesn't say anything about, do they have the right skills and training for what employers have to offer. It's just giving you a big general picture. There's lots more jobs than we have people actively looking for work right now. So in the past, what employers could do when they were looking for someone, they could post a job opening, and unto them would come an array of people, an array of resumes that were more or less qualified for those jobs. That may happen in some places now, but for the most part, what I'm hearing from employers in the last few years, as it's gotten really tight, is that it's getting harder and harder to find workers. It's harder and harder to add jobs for the company to grow because they're being constrained by the number of people that they can hire. So, when I share this news with people who are business folks, who are employers, they get very grim. Oh boy, what are we gonna do? When I share this with young people, with people who have been kind of kept out of the labor force or partially kept out of certain types of jobs, they get kind of a glimmer in their eye and they're like, hey, this looks okay. I think I can do something with this. So it really all depends how you're coming at this, but I can say from the perspective of employers, there are folks out there who are doing interesting, creative things to train their own, to kind of grow their own, to keep people as long as they possibly can retain them, to think up kind of differently and creatively about just how to pull in new workers. Some people are doing it. It's just a matter of needing to respond to the demographics differently. I don't see in the future that we will have a whole lot more growth. We could get a whole lot more immigration. It just doesn't look like that will be the case, at least very soon. And so it will be incumbent on folks to kind of figure out, how do I respond? What do I need to do differently? How do I find the workers that I need to fill my spots? And so with that, do you have questions for me? Yeah.
Well, that first map you showed, it looked like the population growth was around the 94 corridor, but nothing going up 35W. And I was wondering if you had any ideas what was going on there.
Yeah, so the growth historically, if we would look at this same map for 2000 to 2010, it was really the darkest growth areas were kind of a circle around here. I would say the growth that's happening again is still out toward the metro, the St. Cloud metro. We're still seeing growth in our metropolitan areas across the state, just not as much as we're seeing here, right in the middle of the Twin Cities. So I would say that part of that is just being fueled by the fact that there's a big metro right there along I-94 versus 35W. Most of the growth that we're seeing that's outside of the 7 counties is either due to a metropolitan being there, so its own kind of economy drawing people in, or we are seeing some growth in some communities just because of retirements, so people moving to the lake. Yeah.
What are policymakers thinking about the gray counties? What are the implications in the future of those counties that are declining?
So I think policymakers I've been with the state now since about 2012, and in my experience, a lot of times policymakers know that stuff's coming, but they don't really have the kind of political backing to work on policy until it's starting to cause pain. That's when you really start to see movement on things. And I would say for many of these gray areas where it's starting to cause pain right now is in the same issue that I was sharing with you earlier, and that's in terms of employment. Because many of these areas that you see in gray here are in much worse off shape than the Twin Cities. I was showing you the average for Minnesota overall, but for rural areas in particular, who've been losing their younger populations for decades, they're having a really tough time filling jobs right now, particularly as the need for healthcare workers rises in those areas. So I would say that's been kind of the place where I've seen the aging focus now. I think it will be on how do we care for and pay for the health care and long-term care of older adults in these areas in the coming years.
Is the state trying to do something? Because where is it on this map where they did that incubator with the water treatment plant, so they could make the shrimp?
Oh, yeah.
So they are.
Balance in Minnesota.
Where is it?
Down, it's down there in Vern.
Oh, okay.
Southwestern Furnace, yeah.
So I mean, the state is trying to do incubators or something out there in the areas.
Yeah,
You can have a sustainable business.
absolutely. And I
It's
would,
not tied to farm.
Right.
Well, it's still tied to farm, but different.
yeah, I would say too, just the broadband initiatives speak to this as well. Is how can you support businesses in these areas without having to be right in a metropolitan area with high-speed internet access? Yeah, yeah.
As the baby boomers start to increase at over 65, how have you worked in some of the political and legislative changes that might affect where they go? Like to Florida, like.
Oh, yeah. So my role with, I could have said this at the beginning too. So my role with the state is I am not in an appointed position. I'm a demographer, and they call on me for what I can do in terms of scientific research, social scientific and demographic research. So what I can contribute to that conversation is just by explaining where people are moving at what ages and whether or not it's consistent with policies. What we see for older adults is we do see a small, I think I have, I'm picturing a graph in my head that I want you to see. So, oh, there it is. That's what's in my head right now. This is people moving in and out of the state at different ages. And you can see that in these ages, we have more people moving out than we have moving in. It's relatively small. Most of the movement that happens in and out of the state is by people who are 18, 19, 20 years old. So it's certainly a piece of it. There are people indeed that move at those ages, and they are moving to Texas and Florida and California, and Arizona is number one. Arizona. That sure happens. We tend to see a small net influx of people after about age 75. They start coming back, coming back to grandkids, coming back to community. But just to kind of put into perspective, most of the movement's happening by young people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, on your chart that you said about the number of available jobs or people looking for jobs and the ones that are available,
Yeah.
is there a breakdown of to the type of levels? Are they just like low level? Are they mid-level, high level? Because you can have a lot of jobs open, but they're just down in middle, Walmart and
Yeah.
McDonald's, etc.
Yeah. I would say that across there, and I don't have that graph with me, but I'll just explain it to you what's going on. There is a glut of jobs kind of at the low level of the spectrum, skill spectrum and wage spectrum. It's people who are in restaurants and food accommodation, people in retail, some healthcare and social services. There is just a tremendous amount of need in that area. However, across the board, you'll see kind of that there are more job openings than there are, that the demand is across all sectors, all industries, but especially concentrated in the low skill, low wage. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Federal Reserve Bank has done some research on this and has shown that as we've recovered from the recession, people in those jobs have tended to move up, leaving those jobs, and so we kind of have a glut down there of the jobs that are kind of more plentiful. Yeah.
I used to do a lot of work as a futurist, and so as you, we've been predicting this for 30, 40
Yeah.
years, so none of this is really a surprise. The other thing that we used to talk about, because futurists like to be techie, nerdly people too, was things like PDA and people amplifiers and robotics and all of that kind of stuff. And I know there's robots now working at McDonald's, and people are like, oh no, we can't lose those jobs. And as we were always saying is, no, we're gonna need mechanization, robots, robotics, all that to fill the jobs.
Yeah.
Just wondering what your thoughts are on what you see happening. Because the other thing is we gotta get those people on the bottom, way
Yeah.
on the skill level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if there are jobs, especially because the economics of those jobs can't pay enough to support a family, they just can't, to support kind of the basic needs that people have, cost of living. What we see in terms of automation, that certainly is going to play a role in this. It already is. But where we are right now in terms of automation, what we have the capability to put into play right now is pretty limited in terms of the industries and the applications. It won't be soon, but right now pretty much what we can put into place right now and replace people with machines is the jobs that are manual, repetitive, that don't require kind of complex decision making. We're working on, not we, but someone's working on that, but it's a ways off. It's 5-10 years down the road, and these gaps are starting to open up now. So I would say with respect to how automation is unfolding, there does appear to be this little gap where we don't have quite what we need, but we certainly can think about how do we fill those holes right now with the jobs that can be kind of turned over to automation. Yeah.
A little aside is, again, this was years ago when I was actually more active in it. There was research that showed that people preferred their computer doctor to the human doctor.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A question about that chart of growth of 65 plus people.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of hyperventilation about the impact this is going to have.
Yeah.
And what surprises me about this is that we've basically already absorbed the half of the growth of the bubble.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen any great negative impacts on anybody.
Talk to
in
employers,
Minnesota.
yeah. So here's a couple of things. You're right. We are at the very early stages of this, and we're talking about a lot of people in Minnesota who are just around the age of 65, 66, 67 right now. So we're starting to feel it in the workplaces. Some employers are starting to feel it pretty strongly, I guess, particularly in greater Minnesota. But when we're talking about the full impact of this on our systems and on our communities, we really are talking probably more like 10, 15, 20 years out when they start having an increased need for healthcare and long-term care services. So I would say you're absolutely right. So far we've done okay. I mean, we're all still here. We're all still like the world is still here, right? But we do have another decade of these gaps opening up if the economy continues to perform as it has, or even close to what it has. And that eventually could limit economic growth just because of the availability of workers. But that healthcare curve is coming too. The cost of healthcare, the availability of people, and kind of how we manage to pay for public services at the same time that we're also paying for long-term care. That's coming too. That's a different talk. Yeah.
Why the big drop in the 30s?
So what's happening here, if I showed you what the trend looked like, I'm showing you the change. And so it's going from about 680,000 to about 1.3 million from here to here. So I'm just showing you the change. What happens is there's this growth of the older adult population, and then it pretty much levels off. So it's not that the population gets smaller, it just doesn't change that much afterwards. So we're transitioning to an older state, and then we stay in older state going forward. And it's just because we have low birth rates now, it's not balancing out.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Thank you. Over here.
We're going to lose a congressional seat.
Oh, it's so close, guys. It's so close. Last time in 2010, we kept our 8th congressional seat by 8,000 people, and we're very much in the same position again this time. We've had 2 really good years of growth. The past 2 years, we've had fantastic kind of these spurts of growth, which puts us in the running for keeping it, but it's just really right on the line right now. It switches depending on where you are, but you know, California, we were talking about California earlier. When I say where you are, I mean where you are in the decade estimated growth of all 50 states. California, we would be potentially competing with for one of their additional seats. It bounces around a lot. One more? One more? Okay.
I'm concerned about the location of jobs versus the location of people. There's this impression that there's an awful lot of unemployment in cities. Is that really true? Anyway, what's
Yeah. So I think we do see both the people and the jobs kind of co-located, but you're right. Transportation is an issue. I would say that there's this great mapping tool online called On the Map, and it maps exactly how many jobs and how many people are moving in and out of each kind of commute shed. If you're interested in looking city by city by city, On the Map is the application that can let you do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.